So you might be asking yourself, how does damage mitigation actually work for a paladin? Well, first of all, every tank has passive baseline damage mitigation baked into their spec. Most of the baseline damage mitigation is based on stances for tanks, with the exception of Protection Paladins. There are two basic types of damage that you'll encounter frequently while raiding. Physical damage is what you'll deal with most frequently as a tank. An example would be Snapping Bite from Tortos. Magical damage is the other type of damage that you'll encounter often. An example would be Ignite Flesh from the Flaming Head of Majera. So let's go back and take a look at Snapping Bite. Let's say the damage was initially rolled for 675,000. First, this damage would be mitigated by our passive physical damage reduction granted by Sanctuary. Armor would also come into effect. Now, the character sheet gives a physical damage mitigation value that you would have versus a level 90. Tortos, however, is a level 93 boss, so the damage reduction our armor provides against Tortos can be determined with this formula. If we were to plug in the variables using my armor value, then we would get 50.8% damage reduction against physical attacks. So now we can apply the damage reduction from armor to the Snapping Bite attack, which reduces the damage taken considerably. Let's say I got lucky and blocked the attack. We would gain an additional 30% damage reduction. Now, if we aren't completely awful at playing a Protection Paladin, then we will also be timing our Shield of the Righteous for every single Snapping Bite. For me, that would mitigate another 54% of the damage. So, without a cooldown outside of our active mitigation, we can reduce the physical damage that we take significantly. Once damage has been mitigated, absorbs kick in, like Sacred Shield, which means Snapping Bite would pretty much go unnoticed if we deal with it properly. Hopefully you've gathered from this that damage reduction is multiplicative. It doesn't matter which damage reduction is counted first, no matter what order you apply them, the result will be the same. Big damage reduction cooldowns should be considered when taking this into account. A good tank doesn't panic and pop all of their defensive cooldowns at one time. Instead, a good tank will plan on using their cooldowns prior to big incoming damage. In this way, they can essentially map out an encounter and use cooldowns at predictable times. Our primary goal as a tank is to survive the damage that the raid throws at us. But a good tank who is truly seeking to master tanking will attempt to smooth out that damage as much as possible. There are indeed circumstances where in order to survive an attack, a tank will need to consider using multiple cooldowns for a very specific attack. Impale on the Madness of Deathwing immediately comes to mind. Active mitigation in Mists of Pandaria has significantly improved our ability to skillfully deal with heavy physical damage. I've talked a lot about physical damage, so now let's talk about magical damage. Passively, we take a lot more magic damage than most other tanks, with the exception of Death Knights. However, we are compensated with strong cooldowns and slightly better scaling with stamina. Again, minus Death Knights, who scale ridiculously with stamina as well. So let's take a look at a Flaming Head from Majera and its ability, Ignite Flesh. First, the damage would be reduced passively by the magic damage reduction granted by Sanctuary. The ticking damage would also be reduced. We might apply a small damage reduction cooldown prior to the breath, like Ardent Defender, reducing the burst damage from the ability, and also the ticking damage for the duration. With the second breath, our cooldown will have worn off, and the ticking damage will have returned to its previous state. Prior to the next breath, we may opt to use a stronger damage mitigation cooldown, like Guardian of Ancient Kings, as the ticking damage will be much higher, and we don't want to overwhelm our healers. At this point, we may do a tank swap to avoid high stacks on one tank, and I may transition to the Frozen Head. By this time, Guardian of Ancient Kings will have worn off, and I'll be taking significant ticking damage. I'll be anticipating the Frozen Head's breath, while keeping in mind that I still have ticking damage from the Flaming Head. Again, to release stress on the healers and smooth out the incoming damage, I might use Hand of Purity prior to the next breath. Doing this will significantly reduce the ticking damage, while also giving a little bit of damage mitigation for the oncoming breath. Of course, all the damage that remains will potentially be absorbed by Sacred Shield. Hopefully this has given you some insight on how damage is actually mitigated. If not, I'm surprised you lasted this long. But anyways, thanks for watching.